The summoning. The crystalline chamber of the Council of Stars hummed with ancient power, its walls pulsing with light from 1,000 distant galaxies. Admiral Chen Wei stood at the center of the circular platform, her dress uniform immaculate despite the 3-week journey through hyperspace. Around her, the representatives of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations materialized in holographic splendor. The Valkyrie, beings of pure energy contained within intricate lattices of living metal, flickered with what Chen had learned to recognize as disdain. The Thornback Collective, towering insectoids whose empire spanned 400 systems, clicked their mandibles in a rhythm that translated as bureaucratic impatience. The Luminous Path, ethereal beings who claimed to have achieved enlightenment 30,000 years ago, simply radiated an aura of condescension. But it was the eldest, the keeper of the council, who spoke first. Its form was incomprehensible, a shifting mass of geometric impossibilities that made Chen's eyes water when she looked directly at it. Its voice resonated not in her ears but directly in her mind, bypassing language entirely. Humanity, the eldest intoned, has been summoned before this council to answer for its crimes against the established order of the galaxy. Chen kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced. The Empire of Man had known this day would come. 3 centuries of rapid expansion, of colonizing worlds at a pace that alarmed the established powers, of technological advancement that seemed to violate the natural progression of civilization. It had all led to this moment. "The Council recognizes your presence, human," said High Curator Zixtal of the Valkyrie, its metallic voice resonating through the chamber. "You stand accused of violating 17 treaties, colonizing 43 protected worlds, and disrupting the economic stability of 6 sectors. Protected by whom?" Chen asked, her voice steady and clear. The humans who lived on those worlds, who built cities and farms and families there, would be surprised to learn they were trespassing. A ripple of shock emanated from the assembled delegates. The Thornback representative, Ambassador Krichuk, leaned forward, its compound eyes glittering. "The audacity. You speak as though humanity has claim to territories beyond your designated zones. The Council determines expansion rights based on civilization maturity indices that have governed this galaxy for millennia." Chen smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Ah yes, the maturity indices. The same metrics that somehow always favor the species already on the Council, while keeping newcomers in perpetual servitude." She pulled out a data tablet, its human technology crude compared to the quantum processors used by most Council species, yet functional. "I've studied your maturity indices, Ambassador. Fascinating reading." She tapped the screen and holographic data burst into the space above her, filling the chamber with charts and graphs. According to these metrics, humanity should still be struggling with basic interplanetary travel. Yet here we are, with faster-than-light drives of our own design, terraforming technology that surpasses anything in the galactic database, and a population that has grown from 8 billion to 200 billion in just 3 centuries. "Growth achieved through violation of natural law," interjected one of the Luminous Path, its voice like wind chimes made of light. "Your species breeds without restraint, consumes resources with abandon, and refuses to accept the wisdom of those who have walked the stars for eons." "Natural law," Chen repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Tell me, honored delegate, what natural law states that only certain species may thrive? What cosmic principle declares that humanity must accept artificial limits placed by those who fear competition?" The chamber erupted. Dozens of species began transmitting simultaneously, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of light, sound, and telepathic interference. Chen stood unmoved at the center of it all, waiting. The eldest raised what might have been an appendage, and silence crashed down like a physical force. "Admiral Chen, you test the patience of this council. Humanity's expansion threatens the stability that has maintained peace for 10,000 years. Your species must be brought to heel." "Or what?" Chen asked quietly. The question seemed to catch the eldest off guard. It had been millennia since anyone had dared speak to the council with such directness. "Or the full might of the council's enforcement fleets will be brought to bear against your worlds," the eldest replied, its tone suggesting this should be self-evident. 100 species, thousands of ships, weapons that could crack planets. Surely even humanity's arrogance has limits. Chen reached into her jacket pocket slowly, making sure every delegate could see her hand. She withdrew a small device no larger than a coin and placed it on the platform before her. It projected an image into the chamber, a fleet of human warships, sleek and bristling with weapons that no council database could identify. "Let me tell you what humanity has learned in our 3 centuries among the stars," Chen said, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. We've learned that the Council of Stars isn't a government. It's a cartel. The evidence. The holographic projection expanded, filling the council chamber with images that made several delegates recoil. Human ships hung in formation, but these were unlike anything the council had encountered before. Where most species built vessels that were essentially flying cities, designed for comfort and the long centuries of space travel, human warships were lean, aggressive predators. The Valkyrie Concordat controls 90% of the galaxy's helium-3 trade, Chen continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a prosecutor. The Thornback Collective maintains an algorithmic monopoly on FTL navigation data. The Luminous Path owns the patents on gravity manipulation technology that every spacefaring species must license. She gestured at the assembled delegates. You're not guardians of galactic peace. You're an economic empire designed to extract tribute from younger species while ensuring they never grow powerful enough to compete. High Curator Zixdal's energy lattice flared red with anger. These accusations are baseless propaganda. The Council has maintained order and prosperity throughout. The Krell extinction event, Chen interrupted, bringing up new data. 2,000 years ago, the Krell developed their own FTL technology that didn't rely on Council-approved methods. Within a decade, they were deemed a threat to galactic stability, and their homeworld was quarantined. Their civilization collapsed. How convenient for the Council's navigation monopoly. The chamber fell silent. Chen could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes, sensors, and consciousness fields focused on her. She pressed on. The Hasher plague 1,500 years ago. The Hasher discovered a method of terraforming that was 90% more efficient than standard Council techniques. They offered to share it freely. Within months, a plague of unknown origin devastated their population. The cure was only provided after they signed exclusive licensing agreements with the Luminous Path. Chen's eyes swept the chamber. Should I continue? I have 43 more examples. Ambassador Krichuk of the Thornback Collective rose to its full 3-meter height. These are natural tragedies, coincidences misinterpreted by a paranoid species desperate to justify its own aggression. Perhaps, Chen acknowledged. So let's talk about recent history instead. In the past century alone, humanity has received 14 compliance directives from this council. Each directive coincidentally forced us to adopt technologies, trade agreements, or political structures that benefited council member species. She pulled up a new set of documents. Take Directive 793, the mandate on energy production standards. It required us to abandon our fusion reactor designs and purchase Valkyrie power systems instead, at costs 300% higher than our domestic production. Zixdal's lattice flickered, but it said nothing. Or Directive 821, Chen continued, warming to her subject. The safety protocol on genetic modification. It forbade humanity from using our own gene therapy techniques to adapt colonists to high-gravity worlds. Instead, we were required to license Thornback biological augmentation services. Funny how this safety concerns disappeared once the contracts were signed. She paused, letting the information sink in. Here's what humanity realized, honored delegates. The Council doesn't fear us because we're dangerous. You fear us because we refuse to be dependent. We built our own FTL drives instead of licensing yours. We terraformed worlds using techniques we developed ourselves. We grew our population and our economy without asking permission. And in doing so, we exposed the greatest lie in the galaxy. And what lie is that? The eldest asked, its voice devoid of emotion. That the Council's way is the only way, Chen replied. That young species must spend centuries, millennia even, under your guidance before they're ready to stand on their own. You've convinced the galaxy that progress must be slow, controlled, and approved by committee. But humanity's existence proves that's false. We've advanced further in 3 centuries than most species do in 3,000. Not because we're special, but because we were desperate enough to ignore your restrictions. One of the Luminous Path, this one introducing itself as radiance upon still waters, floated forward. Its voice carried a note of genuine curiosity rather than condescension. And what does humanity propose? Anarchy? A galaxy where every species develops weapons of mass destruction without oversight? Where resource conflicts escalate into extinction events? Chen nodded, acknowledging the valid concern. No, honored Radiance. We propose something far more revolutionary, actual equality. A council that doesn't privilege the old over the new, the established over the emerging. Open technology sharing, free trade, and the right of every species to chart its own course without economic coercion disguised as guidance. Impossible, stated Zixtal flatly. The galaxy would descend into chaos. Would it? Chen asked. Or would it simply descend into competition? And is that what really frightens you? The possibility that species you've kept subordinate might prove to be your equals, or even your superiors in a fair market. The chamber erupted again, but this time Chen noted something different in the chaos. Not all the delegates were protesting. Some were silent, their attention fixed on the data sheet presented. Others were communicating quietly among themselves, their expressions, where such could be read, thoughtful rather than angry. The eldest restored order once more. Admiral Chen, you have made serious accusations against the Council. If you have proof of these claims, present it now. Otherwise, this body will proceed with enforcement action against humanity. Chen smiled. Proof? Oh, I have something better than proof. I have a witness. She touched her communicator. Send him in. The chamber's entrance irised open, and a figure walked through that caused a wave of genuine shock to ripple through the assembled delegates. It was a Valkyrie, but unlike any Chen had seen before. Its energy lattice was dull, barely functioning, and portions of its metallic containment frame were patched with crude repairs. Allow me to introduce historian Zhao Moore, Chen said. Formerly of the Valkyrie Preservation Archives. Tell them what you told me, historian. The truth speaks. Historian Zhao Moore shuffled forward on damaged locomotion units, each step producing a faint grinding sound that made several Valkyrie delegates recoil in what might have been horror or shame. His energy lattice pulsed weakly, the once brilliant containment field now a sickly amber color that spoke of centuries of neglect and decline. I am Zhao Moore, son of the archives, keeper of forgotten truths, he began, his voice a rasping metallic whisper that the translation matrices struggled to process. For 800 cycles I maintain the preservation archives on Velkar Prime, the repository of our civilization's complete history, including records deemed unsuitable for public access by the High Curators. High Curator Zixtal's lattice flared brilliant red. This individual is a criminal, expelled from Valkyrie society for theft of classified materials and dissemination of state secrets. His testimony is worthless. Classified. Zhao Moore's laugh was like metal scraping against metal. You mean suppressed? Hidden? Erased from our people's memory because it contradicted the narrative the Council required. He turned to face the assembled delegates, his damaged form somehow radiating dignity. I was not expelled for theft. I was exiled for discovering the truth about the Council's founding and refusing to bury it. These are the delusions of a malfunctioning intelligence, Zixtal insisted. His containment matrix is clearly degraded. He should not be permitted to. I have the documents, Zhao Moore interrupted, producing a crystalline storage device that gleamed with authentic Valkyrie data encryption. 12,000 years of true history before the Council rewrote it. Before they made us forget what we were. The eldest leaned forward, its impossible geometry shifting in ways that suggested intense interest. Speak, historian. If you have truth, this Council will hear it. Zhao Moore activated the device, and the chamber filled with images from ancient times. The galaxy looked different. Younger, wilder, with fewer established civilizations and vast territories unclaimed by any power. 15,000 years ago there was no Council of Stars. There were simply civilizations, each growing at its own pace, trading and sometimes warring as species do. The galaxy was chaotic, yes, but it was also vibrant with possibility. The images shifted, showing the rise of 5 particular civilizations. The Valkyrie, the Thornbacks, the Luminous Path, the eldest species, and one other that Chen didn't recognize. A race of crystalline beings with ships that seemed grown rather than built. These 5 species reached a critical threshold almost simultaneously, Zhao Moore continued. They developed technologies that allowed them to expand rapidly, to claim vast territories, to exploit resources on a scale never before seen. And they realized something. If they competed directly, they would destroy each other. So they made a pact. The Treaty of Unity, Ambassador Krichuk said quietly. We learned about this in our own histories. It was the foundation of the Council, 5 species choosing cooperation over conflict. That's the official version, Zhao Moore agreed. But the archives contain the actual treaty. Let me show you the clauses that were never made public. New text appeared, written in 5 different ancient languages but translated by the chamber's systems. Chen watched as delegates began to read, and she saw the moment comprehension dawned. Mandibles clicked in agitation. Energy fields fluctuated wildly. Telepathic emanations turned sharp and accusatory. Article 7, Zhao Moore read aloud. The signatories agreed to establish protocols that will manage the development of younger civilizations, ensuring they do not reach technological parity with Council species within a time frame that could threaten established economic interests. He paused. The maturity indices weren't designed to help young species develop safely. They were designed to keep them dependent. Article 12, he continued. The signatories agreed to maintain exclusive control over key strategic resources and technologies, licensing these to younger civilizations at rates sufficient to fund Council operations and maintain member species' economic dominance. Another pause. The licensing fees, the technology restrictions, the endless bureaucracy, all of it was designed from the beginning to extract wealth from species too weak to resist. And Article 23, Zalmor said, his voice dropping. In the event that any non-Council civilization develops technologies or achieves growth rates that threaten to disrupt the established order, the Council may employ any means necessary, including but not limited to, economic sanctions, technological sabotage, biological warfare, and complete military suppression, to neutralize the threat. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the chamber's ambient systems seemed to quiet, as if the space itself was holding its breath. The Krell, someone whispered. Chin couldn't identify the speaker. The Hasher. The Vorlak Rebellion. The collapse of the Crystal Singers. That last made Zalmor flinch, and Chin noticed several delegates staring at the space where the fifth founding species should have been represented. The Crystal Singers, Zalmor said softly. The fifth founding member of the Council. They grew uncomfortable with the treaty's implications after the Krell extinction. They argued for genuine cooperation with younger species, for open sharing of technology. The other 4 Council members voted to expel them. When they refused to accept the decision and began sharing technology freely. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. They were eliminated, Chin finished. The Council declared them a rogue state and systematically dismantled their civilization. Not a single Crystal Singer remains in the galaxy today. All because they wanted to help younger species rather than exploit them. The eldest form rippled, and for the first time, Chin heard something like uncertainty in its psychic voice. These documents could be forgeries. The historian is, as the High Curator noted, a known criminal. I had them authenticated, Chin replied. By the archivists of Kelvar, who owe no loyalty to any Council species. The documents are genuine. The treaty is real. The Council of Stars was built on a foundation of oppression, and it has maintained that foundation through violence and deception for 15 millennia. A new voice echoed through the chamber, and Chin recognized it as belonging to one of the smaller Council species, the Silathai, bird-like beings who held only minor positions in the Council hierarchy. If this is true, the Silathai representative said, then we have been complicit in atrocities. We have participated in a system built to crush civilizations that dared to be independent. We have, Chin agreed. But awareness of injustice is the first step toward correcting it. Humanity didn't come here to destroy the Council. We came to transform it. Transform it how? Radiance upon Still Waters asked. The Luminous Path delegate seemed genuinely engaged now, its earlier condescension replaced by cautious interest. Chen's expression hardened. By giving every species in this galaxy the same choice the Council's founders gave themselves, the freedom to rise or fall on their own merit, without artificial barriers imposed by those who fear competition. The human proposition. Admiral Chin manipulated her data tablet, and the holographic display transformed. The Council chamber filled with an intricate network of connections, showing hundreds of civilizations linked by trade routes, technology exchanges, and diplomatic relationships. But the connections weren't the usual Council-controlled pathways. These were new, independent, and most significantly, they bypassed Council authority entirely. For the past 75 years, Chin explained, humanity has been building an alternative network. We call it the Free Trade Concordat. Every species that joins agrees to 3 simple principles: open technology sharing, voluntary cooperation, and the right to self-determination. No licensing fees. No artificial development restrictions. No hidden clauses that benefit the founders at everyone else's expense. Ambassador Krichuk's mandibles clattered in what the translator rendered as harsh laughter. Naive idealism. Such a system would collapse within decades. Younger species would weaponize advanced technologies they don't understand. Resource conflicts would escalate into wars. Would they? Chin asked. The Concordat currently includes 47 civilizations. In 75 years, we've had exactly 3 armed conflicts, all resolved through arbitration within 18 months. Compare that to the Council's track record: 16 proxy wars, 8 enforcement actions, and countless economic sanctions in the same period. She brought up new data showing economic growth curves. The Concordat species have experienced an average growth rate 300% higher than comparable Council member species. Technological advancement is faster. Quality of life indicators are superior. And not a single member species has attempted to leave, while 6 have petitioned to join in the past decade alone. Because you allow them to be reckless, Zixtal accused. To develop without guidance, without the wisdom that comes from millennia of experience. No, Chin corrected. We allow them to be free. There's a difference. She gestured at historian Zalmore. The historian isn't the only Council citizen who has defected to us. We have thousands, engineers, scientists, artists, ordinary people who were tired of living in a civilization that had traded dynamism for stagnation. They tell us the same story. Council species haven't had a major innovation in generations. You've become so focused on maintaining control that you've forgotten how to grow. One of the smaller delegates, a methane-breathing species called the Kalan, spoke up. The human says things that many of us have thought but dared not voice. I represent a species that has paid licensing fees to the Council for 600 years. In that time, we have been granted exactly 4 minor technology upgrades, each requiring decades of negotiation and payment. Meanwhile, human species who joined their Concordat gained access to fusion technology, advanced agriculture, and medical treatments that extended their lifespans by 40 years, all within a decade, all freely given. Given? Zixtal's energy lattice pulsed with skepticism. Nothing is free, Ambassador. The humans must extract some benefit. We do, Shin acknowledged. Every species that joins brings their own innovations, their own perspectives, their own solutions to problems we might not have considered. The Kalan, for example, developed a method of atmospheric processing that works in high-pressure environments. They shared it freely with the Concordat, and now 6 other species benefit from technology they couldn't have developed themselves. In return, the Kalan received agricultural techniques from the Ventheri and medical knowledge from Earth. Everyone benefits. No one is left behind. She pulled up another image, a world half covered in purple vegetation, with gleaming cities visible on the night side. This is Harmon's world, a planet humanity colonized 40 years ago. It was a marginal environment, barely capable of supporting human life. Today it's home to 7 billion people of 4 different species, all thriving together. The terraforming used Kalan atmospheric techniques, Ventheri biological engineering, human industrial capacity, and Silathai architectural principles. No one species could have created it alone. Together we built a paradise. A single success story does not validate your entire system, Ambassador Krichek argued, but Chin detected a note of uncertainty in its tone. Then let me show you 43 more, Chin replied, and the display filled with images of worlds transformed, civilizations revitalized, problems solved through cooperation rather than coercion. This is what's possible when species work together as equals rather than rulers and subjects. The eldest form contracted, as if drawing inward to consider what it was seeing. When it spoke, its voice carried a weight that silenced all other conversation. You speak of equality and freedom, Admiral Chin. Noble concepts. But you have not addressed the fundamental concern. What happens when a species within your Concordat develops weapons capable of destroying worlds? What happens when territorial disputes arise between equals with no higher authority to arbitrate? We handle it the same way humanity handled it before we left Earth, Chin said. Through law, diplomacy, and when necessary, collective action by the community of civilizations. The difference is that our laws are written by consensus, not imposed by the powerful. Our arbitration is truly neutral, not biased toward those with the most economic leverage. And our collective action is defensive, protecting the community, not offensive, enforcing the will of an oligarchy. She turned to face the eldest directly, a gesture of disrespect that would normally be unthinkable. You ask what happens when someone develops planet-destroying weapons? We already have them. Humanity could crack a world if we chose to. So could the Kalan, the Ventheri, and at least a dozen other Concordat species. And yet, we don't use them because we've built a civilization where such weapons are unnecessary. Where conflicts are resolved through dialogue rather than destruction. Because you haven't existed long enough to face a real crisis, Zixtal said, but the energy lattice's color had shifted to a less aggressive hue. Wait 1,000 years, 2,000. See if your idealism survives. Perhaps it won't, Chin admitted. Perhaps we'll fail and the Concordat will collapse and we'll have to try something different. But at least we'll fail or succeed based on our own choices, not because someone else decided we weren't mature enough to be trusted with our own future. She spread her hands. That's all humanity asks, the same right the Council's founders claimed 15,000 years ago. The right to try. Radiance upon still waters drifted closer, its luminous form pulsing thoughtfully. The human speaks with conviction, but conviction alone does not make truth. What assurances can you provide that this Concordat will not simply become another council, another group of powerful species exploiting the weak? Chin reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, crystalline cube. This contains the complete charter of the Free Trade Concordat, including all our operating principles, economic data, and governance structures. It also contains something the Council Charter has never included, a dissolution clause. If 2/3 of Concordat members agree at any time that the organization has become corrupt or oppressive, it will be disbanded immediately, with no ability to enforce compliance. We built an escape hatch into our own system because we understand that power corrupts, and we refuse to become what we're fighting against. She held the cube up so every delegate could see it. This is what differentiates us from the Council. We don't claim to be perfect. We don't pretend to have all the answers. We're just trying to build something better than what exists. A galaxy where every species gets to write its own story. The silence that followed was different from before. Chin could sense something shifting in the chamber, a crack appearing in the monolithic certainty that had governed the Council for millennia. Then Ambassador Krichuk did something unexpected. It stood and, with deliberate ceremony, removed the ornate chain of office that marked its position on the Council. I am tired, it said simply. Tired of enforcing rules I do not believe in. Tired of watching young civilizations crushed beneath regulations designed to keep them weak. Tired of pretending that what we do here serves anyone but ourselves. The delegate placed the chain on the platform before it. I cannot speak for the Thornback Collective as a whole, but I can speak for myself. I wish to learn more about this Concordat. And if it is truly what the human describes, I wish to help build it. The chamber erupted in chaos once more. The fracture. The council chamber descended into pandemonium. Delegates from dozens of species transmitted simultaneously, their various forms of communication creating a storm of light, sound, and telepathic noise. High Curator Zixdal's energy lattice blazed crimson with rage, while several smaller delegates were already beginning to flicker out, presumably to report to their home governments. Ambassador Krichuk remained standing, its chain of office abandoned on the platform, mandibles set in what Chen had learned to recognize as Thornback determination. It wasn't alone. 3 other delegates had also removed their symbols of office. 2 from species Chen barely recognized, minor council members who had likely spent centuries watching from the periphery, and 1 from the Silathai contingent. Traitors. Zixdal's voice cut through the chaos. You abandon your oaths, your responsibilities, Our complicity, Krichuk interrupted. I have served on this council for 60 years, High Curator. 60 years of watching civilizations stunted, economies exploited, and dissent crushed. The humans showed me something I had forgotten, what courage looks like. The eldest raised what might have been multiple appendages, and once again silence crashed down like a physical force. But this time, Chin noticed something different. The psychic weight of its presence felt lighter, as if its certainty had been shaken. This council will not be swayed by sentiment and dramatic gestures, the eldest declared, though its voice lacked its earlier absolute authority. Ambassador Krichuk, you and the others who have abandoned your posts are hereby expelled from. By what authority? The question came from an unexpected source, radiance upon still waters of the luminous path. The enlightened being drifted to the center of the chamber, its form pulsing with colors Chen had never seen it display before. Eldest, I have meditated on the human's words and the historian's evidence. I have searched my memory for justification of our actions, for proof that we are the guardians we claim to be. I have found only rationalizations and lies we tell ourselves to sleep soundly while others suffer under our governance. Radiance, you overstep, another luminous path delegate warned. Do I? Radiance turned to face its fellow delegates. We claim to have achieved enlightenment, to have transcended the petty concerns of material beings. Yet we hoard technology, demand tribute, and suppress those who seek to rise. What enlightenment is there in oppression? What wisdom in fear? Chin watched as fault lines appeared throughout the council. It wasn't a simple split between the powerful and the weak, it was more complex than that. Some of the smaller species were defending the council fiercely, perhaps afraid of what chaos might follow its collapse. Some of the major powers were silent, their delegates communicating frantically with their home governments. And a growing number were simply watching, waiting to see which way the tide would turn. Admiral Qin, the eldest said, and its voice had changed. The absolute certainty was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like weariness. You have disrupted 15,000 years of carefully maintained order. Even if your accusations have merit, and I do not concede that they do, what you propose is reckless beyond measure. The galaxy could burn. The galaxy is already burning, Qin replied softly. It's just been a slow burn, so gradual you stop noticing. Civilizations dying by degrees, potential squandered, innovation strangled. You've created a galaxy that's safe, stable, and utterly stagnant. She gestured at the delegates who had removed their chains of office. These individuals understand something you've forgotten. Safety bought through oppression isn't peace. It's just a prison you've convinced yourself is comfortable. Zixtal's lattice flared. Enough philosophical debate. The Council must act. Humanity's expansion must be halted, their concordat dismantled and order restored. I call for an immediate vote on enforcement action. Seconded, said one of the Thornback delegates who remained loyal to the Council. The eldest shifted its impossible geometry, and Qin felt the weight of its attention focus on her with crushing intensity. Before we vote, humanity must understand the consequences of defiance. Our enforcement fleets number in the thousands. Our weapons can sterilize worlds. Even if your concordat stood with you, and I doubt they would risk everything for a species they've known less than a century, you cannot prevail against the combined might of the Council. Qin smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even the eldest pause. You're assuming we would fight you with ships and weapons, eldest? That's your first mistake. She activated her tablet, and new images filled the chamber, not of weapons or fleets but of something far more dangerous. Economic data, trade networks, resource flows, manufacturing capacity, and population figures that made several delegates gasp. The Council controls approximately 40% of the galaxy's economic output, Qin explained. Impressive, especially considering Council species represent only 15% of the galaxy's sapient population. That disparity is the foundation of your power. You've structured the economy so that everyone depends on you. She zoomed in on specific data points. But here's what happened in the 75 years since humanity started building the Concordat. That 40% has dropped to 32%. And it's accelerating. Last year alone, 16 major trade routes were redirected through Concordat channels. 3 resource cartels collapsed because free market alternatives became available. And 4 Council member species saw their economies shrink while Concordat economies grew. More data appeared. Manufacturing statistics, innovation indices, patent filings. The Council hasn't filed a major patent in 600 years. The Concordat filed 2,000 last year alone. Your shipyards build vessels using techniques that are generations old. Ours improve with every new hull. Your medical technology can extend a lifespan by perhaps 50 years. Ours added 200 years to human longevity in just 3 generations. Qin's voice grew harder. You threaten us with military force, but that's your second mistake. This isn't a war that will be won with weapons, eldest. It's an economic and ideological competition, and you're already losing. Every year, more species look at the Council's stagnation and the Concordat's dynamism and make a choice. Every year your grip weakens. Then we will strike before you grow stronger, Zixtal declared. The Council will authorize. The Council will authorize nothing without proof of hostile intent, interrupted Ambassador Krichuk, who was still technically a member despite having abandoned its chain of office. By the Council's own charter, military action requires unanimous consent of all major powers or clear evidence of aggression by the target. Humanity has committed no acts of war. They have violated treaties, colonized restricted worlds, and treaties they never agreed to, Krichuk countered. Worlds that were restricted, without any consultation of the species living there. Every accusation you level could equally be applied to what the Council did during its own expansion phase. The only difference is that humanity refuses to bend the knee. Zixtal turned to the eldest. Are we truly going to allow this insurrection to continue? To let centuries of careful planning unravel because some delegates developed a conscience? The eldest was silent for a long moment. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a sadness that surprised Qin. I remember when we founded this council. We told ourselves we were building a better galaxy, one where the chaos and violence of earlier eras would be replaced by order and cooperation. We believed it then. Perhaps some of us still do. It shifted to face Qin directly. But you are right about one thing, Admiral. We have become what we sought to prevent. A force that stifles rather than nurtures, that fears change rather than embraces it. I do not know if your Concordat is the answer. But I am beginning to suspect that the Council, in its current form, is part of the problem. The confession sent shockwaves through the chamber. The eldest, oldest and most powerful of the Council's members had just admitted doubt. This is absurd. Zixtal protested. Eldest, surely you cannot mean. I mean that we will not vote on military action today, the eldest declared. Instead, I propose something that has not occurred in 5,000 years, a conclave of reconsideration. Every species in the galaxy, council member or not, will be invited to send representatives. We will examine the evidence presented here. We will discuss the future we want to build. And we will decide, collectively, whether the Council of Stars should continue to exist in its current form. Qin felt a surge of triumph but kept her expression neutral. This was more than she dared hope for, not victory but the genuine possibility of change. You're granting legitimacy to their rebellion, Zixtal said, its lattice now flickering between colors that suggested genuine distress. No, the eldest replied. I am granting legitimacy to the truth. If the Council's foundations are rotten, then no amount of force will preserve them. And if they are sound, then they will withstand scrutiny. We have feared examination for too long, High Curator. Perhaps it is time to have faith in what we have built, or to acknowledge that it is time to build something new. The Conclave. 60 days later, the Conclave of Reconciliation convened on the neutral world of Meridian Prime, a planet equidistant from all major population centers and claimed by no single species. The venue was a massive arena that had once hosted the First Contact Games, an ancient celebration of galactic diversity that had been discontinued 2,000 years ago when the Council decided such displays were inefficient. Qin stood at the human delegation's platform, looking out at a sight that took her breath away. Representatives from more than 300 civilizations filled the arena. Not just Council members but every spacefaring species in the known galaxy. The small species, the newly emerged, the long suppressed, all had been given equal voice for the first time in millennia. The opening ceremonies were conducted by the eldest, whose form seemed somehow diminished compared to its appearance at the Council chamber. Perhaps, Qin thought, certainty had been part of what made it seem so massive. We gather today to question the assumptions that have governed our galaxy for 15,000 years, the eldest announced, its psychic voice reaching every being in the arena. This is not a trial. This is not a negotiation. This is a conversation about what kind of galaxy we wish to inhabit. Over the next weeks, delegates presented evidence, testimony, and arguments that shook the foundations of galactic civilization. The historian Zalmor was far from the only witness. Dozens of others came forward with suppressed documents, personal testimonies, and data that painted a damning picture of the Council's activities. But Qin was careful to ensure the Concordat didn't simply replace one narrative with another. She invited Council defenders to present their case, to explain the reasoning behind their actions, to argue for the stability they had maintained. Some of their points were valid. The galaxy had known fewer major wars under Council governance. Extinction events had decreased. Basic standards of living had improved across most civilizations. The question became, could the benefits of order be maintained without the cost of oppression? On the 18th day of the conclave, a young delegate from the Calthari, a species that had only achieved spaceflight 50 years ago, stood to speak. Her name was Shirala, and her words would be remembered for generations. I have listened to the arguments of the ancient powers, she said, her voice clear despite her species' barely tested translation technology. They speak of stability, of preventing chaos, of guiding younger species toward maturity. And I wonder, do they hear the condescension in their own words? Do they understand that every time they say younger species, what we hear is inferior species? Shirala pulled up holographic data showing her own civilization's development. The Calthari achieved fusion power 43 years ago. We applied for a council development grant to help expand our energy infrastructure. The application process took 11 years. The approval required us to sign exclusive trade agreements with Velcari interests. The actual technology transfer took 6 more years. By the time we received help, a generation of our people had lived in energy poverty. She turned to face the Concordat delegation. 3 years ago we made contact with human explorers. They offered to share their fusion technology immediately, freely, with only one condition: that we, in turn, share any innovations we developed with other Concordat members. We accepted. Within 8 months, Every Kelthari city had unlimited clean energy. Our economy grew by 300%. Our lifespan increased by 40 years as medical technology improved. She gestured at the council delegates. The ancient powers say they want to help us. But help that comes with chains isn't help. It's servitude with better public relations. The arena erupted in agreement from dozens of smaller civilizations. Qin watched as the political landscape shifted in real time. This wasn't humanity's rebellion anymore, it was becoming a galaxy-wide movement. But not everyone was convinced. A delegate from the Vornash hegemony, a civilization that had thrived under the council's patronage, stood to present a counterargument. The Concordat speaks of freedom and rapid development, the Vornash delegate said. But they do not speak of responsibility. My people were once like the Kelthari, young, ambitious, eager to rush forward. Left to our own devices, we nearly destroyed ourselves with weapons we developed before we had the wisdom to control them. It was the council's intervention, their patient guidance, that saved us from extinction. The delegate pulled up images of a scarred planet, continents still bearing the marks of atomic warfare. This was our homeworld 2,000 years ago. This is what happens when species develop too quickly, without the restraining influence of older, wiser civilizations. The council's restrictions saved my species. Perhaps they could save others. It was a powerful argument, and Qin saw several delegates nodding in agreement. But she also noticed that the Vornash delegate was younger, probably born long after the crisis it described. It knew only the stories it had been taught, the narrative of council benevolence. Radiance upon still waters requested the floor, and its words carried the weight of genuine philosophical struggle. The Vornash delegate speaks truth, but perhaps not the truth they intend. Yes, their civilization nearly destroyed itself. Yes, the council intervened. But ask yourself, in the 2,000 years since, have the Vornash been permitted to solve their own problems? To develop their own wisdom? Or have they simply traded one form of danger for another, the danger of self-destruction for the danger of perpetual dependence? The luminous path delegate paused, letting the question hang in the air. Wisdom cannot be given. It must be earned through experience, through mistakes, through the hard work of learning and growing. By preventing younger species from facing challenges, we do not protect them. We infantilize them. We ensure they never develop the capacity to stand on their own. Ambassador Krichuk, who had become an unofficial bridge between the Council and Concordat factions, added its perspective. I have spent the past 60 days reviewing my own civilization's history, the true history, not the sanitized version we tell ourselves. The Thornback Collective nearly collapsed 3 times before we achieved stability. Each crisis was painful, costly, and taught us lessons we could not have learned any other way. The Council's founders were forged in fire. Why do we deny that same crucible to others? The debates continued for another month, with positions evolving as new information emerged and old certainties crumbled. But gradually, a consensus began to form, not universal agreement, but a critical mass of civilizations that recognized the need for fundamental change. On the 63rd day of the conclave, the eldest called for a vote on what would become known as the Meridian Accords. The proposal was simple but revolutionary: the Council of Stars would be dissolved. In its place would rise a new organization, the Galactic Assembly, with radically different principles. Every civilization would have equal representation regardless of age or power. Technology sharing would be encouraged but never mandatory. Economic relationships would be governed by free market principles rather than cartel arrangements. Most importantly, there would be no maturity indices, no artificial barriers to development. Species would succeed or fail based on their own choices, with help available from those who wished to provide it, but never imposed on those who declined. The vote was not unanimous. Roughly 30% of civilizations, mostly those who had benefited most from the old system, voted against the change. But it was overwhelming enough. 217 civilizations voted yes. The Council of Stars, after 15,000 years of dominance, was no more. A new dawn. 6 months after the Meridian Accords were signed, Admiral Qin Wei stood in what had once been the Council Chamber, now redesignated as Assembly Hall 1. The space had been physically transformed. The hierarchical arrangement of platforms had been replaced by a circular configuration where every delegation sat at the same level. The crystalline walls, once pulsing with the light of established power, now displayed a rotating showcase of achievements from civilizations throughout the galaxy. The first session of the Galactic Assembly was about to begin, and Qin was no longer just an admiral. She had been elected, along with representatives from 6 other civilizations, to serve on the Assembly's coordinating committee, a temporary body designed to guide the transition from the old system to the new. Nervous? Asked a familiar voice. Chen turned to see Ambassador Krichuk, who had also been elected to the committee. Terrified, Chen admitted. It's one thing to tear down an old system. Building a new one is considerably harder. Indeed, Krichuk agreed, its mandibles clicking in what Chen had learned was the Thornback equivalent of a wry smile. Already we have 3 territorial disputes, 5 trade disagreements, and 1 species claiming another stole their industrial designs. All things the Council would have simply suppressed or decided by fiat. And now we have to actually solve them, Chen said. Through negotiation, compromise, and consensus. It's messy, slow, and frustrating. It's democracy, radiance upon still waters interjected, drifting over to join them. Which has always been messy, slow, and frustrating. But also more durable than autocracy in the long run. The eldest approached, its form somehow seeming smaller and more comprehensible than it had been during the Council era. Chen had learned that it, or rather they, for the eldest was a collective consciousness, had voluntarily reduced their psychic presence to avoid intimidating other species. The assembly is ready to begin, the eldest announced. Ambassador Chen, as the being whose actions precipitated this transformation, the coordinating committee has voted to grant you the honor of opening remarks. Chen felt a flutter of panic. She'd prepared something, of course, but standing before 300 civilizations and setting the tone for a new galactic order was a weight she hadn't fully anticipated. She took a deep breath and walked to the center of the circular chamber. The conversations quieted as attention focused on her. 6 months ago, Chen began, I stood in this chamber and accused the Council of Stars of being a cartel designed to exploit younger civilizations. Today I stand before you and say, I was both right and wrong. That got their attention. Confused murmurs rippled through the assembly. I was right about the facts, Chen continued. The Council did suppress development, did maintain economic control through coercion, did eliminate civilizations that threatened their authority. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. But I was wrong about something more fundamental. I believed that the Council members were villains, that they knew what they were doing was wrong and did it anyway out of greed or malice. She gestured at the former Council delegates, many of whom now sat among the regular representatives. I've spent these past 6 months working closely with many of them, and I've learned that most truly believed they were doing the right thing. They saw chaos in the galaxy and believed order was worth any price. They saw young civilizations making mistakes and believed guidance, even forced guidance, was justified. They were wrong, but they were wrong with good intentions. Chen's voice grew stronger. That realization has been humbling. Because it means we, the architects of this new assembly, could also be wrong with good intentions. We believe in freedom, in self-determination, in the marketplace of ideas and technologies. But what if we're wrong? What if the Council's founders felt the same certainty we do now, and time slowly corrupted their vision into oppression? She paused, letting the uncomfortable question settle over the assembly. There's no guarantee we won't make similar mistakes, Chen admitted. No perfect system that will prevent future injustice. All we can do is build in safeguards, remain humble about our own limitations, and stay vigilant against the slow creep of corruption that transforms idealism into tyranny. She pulled out a small device and activated it, projecting text into the space above the assembly, the founding document of the Galactic Assembly, still being refined and debated. Article 53 of our charter, Chen read aloud. Every 10 years, the Assembly will conduct a full review of its own operations, with input from member civilizations and independent observers. If 2/3 of member species vote that the Assembly has become oppressive or corrupt, it will be dissolved and a new constitutional convention convened. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. We're building a time bomb into our own government. A self-destruct mechanism. Because we know that power corrupts, that organizations drift toward self-preservation, that today's liberators can become tomorrow's oppressors. This assembly will only survive if it continues to serve the interests of all species, not just the powerful. Ambassador Shirala of the Kelthari stood. Ambassador Chen, I have a question. The Meridian Accords promise that all civilizations will be equal in the assembly. But realistically, species like humanity, the Valkyrie, and the Thornbacks will always have more economic and military power than species like mine. How do we ensure that formal equality doesn't mask continued domination by the strong? It was a fair question, one that had been debated extensively during the drafting process. We can't ensure it, Chen answered honestly. Power imbalances are a fact of nature. Some civilizations will always be richer, more technologically advanced, more populous than others. But we can do three things. First, we separate economic power from political power. In this assembly, the Keltharies' vote counts exactly the same as humanity's vote. Second, we protect minority rights rigorously. No majority, however large, can vote to violate the fundamental rights of a minority. And third, we commit to radical transparency. She gestured at the walls displaying real-time information. Every assembly proceeding is public. Every vote is recorded. Every trade agreement is published. Corruption thrives in darkness. So we flood everything with light and trust that an informed galactic public will hold their representatives accountable. But what about species that don't want to join? Asked a delegate from one of the holdout civilizations. What if we prefer the old ways, or want to develop independently without any assembly involvement? Chin smiled. Then you're free to do so. The assembly claims no authority over civilizations that choose not to join. We hope you'll reconsider. We think the benefits of membership outweigh the costs. But ultimately, self-determination means respecting the choices of others, even when we disagree with those choices. Even if those choices lead to disaster? The delegate pressed. Even then, Chin confirmed. With one exception. If a non-member civilization commits acts of aggression against member civilizations, the assembly reserves the right to respond defensively. But otherwise, yes, every species has the right to succeed or fail on their own terms. The debates continued for hours as delegates raised concerns, proposed modifications, and argued passionately for different visions of the galaxy's future. Chin participated when her expertise was relevant, but mostly she listened, learning how other species thought about governance, rights, and the balance between freedom and security. As the first session drew to a close, the eldest requested the floor one final time. I have lived for a very long time, it said, its psychic voice carrying a depth of emotion Chin had never heard before. I was there when the Council of Stars was founded. I helped write the original treaties that Admiral Chin exposed as instruments of oppression. And I lived with the consequences of those decisions for 15,000 years. The eldest's form shifted, colors moving through its impossible geometry. I do not know if this new assembly will succeed. I do not know if humanity's ideals will prove more durable than the Council's order. But I know this. Watching this chamber today, seeing 300 civilizations debate as equals, listening to young species like the Keltharies speak with confidence rather than deference, this is something I had forgotten was possible. This is hope. It turned to face Chin directly. Admiral, you forced an old being to remember what it felt like to be young, to believe that change was possible, to hope that the future could be better than the past. For that, regardless of what comes next, you have my gratitude. Chin felt tears welling in her eyes but didn't try to hide them. Eldest, the gratitude is mutual. You could have ordered the council fleets to attack when I challenged your authority. Instead you chose to listen. That took more courage than anything I did. The session concluded with a formal vote to officially inaugurate the Galactic Assembly. The result was unanimous among the attending delegates. All 217 civilizations that had signed the Meridian Accords affirmed their commitment to the new order. As delegates began to disperse, Chin found herself standing alone in the chamber, looking up at the crystalline walls now displaying achievements from civilizations across the galaxy. A Kelthari medical breakthrough that had saved millions. A Silathai architectural innovation that allowed cities to exist in previously uninhabitable environments. A joint human Thornback industrial project that had boosted manufacturing efficiency by 40%. Impressive, isn't it? Historian Zalmor shuffled up beside her, his damaged form moving with surprising grace. 47 new inventions shared freely in just the past month. 12 new civilizations petitioned to join the assembly. And only 3 minor conflicts, all resolved through negotiation. It's early yet, Chin cautioned. The real test will come when something goes seriously wrong, when the easy consensus breaks down and we have to make hard choices. True, Zalmor agreed. But consider, the council lasted 15,000 years before it was challenged. If the assembly lasts even 1,000 years before needing fundamental reform, it will have proven more adaptable than its predecessor. And if it manages to reform itself rather than being overthrown, it will have achieved something unique in galactic history. Chin nodded slowly. Did you ever think, in all those centuries maintaining the archives, that you'd see something like this? Never, Zalmor admitted. I expected to die alone, exiled, my warnings ignored and my evidence dismissed as the ravings of a malfunctioning mind. Instead, I stand in a chamber where truth is valued over power. It's enough to make an old Velcari believe in miracles. They stood together in companionable silence, watching as the last delegates left the chamber. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conflicts, new problems that no one knew how to solve. But for tonight they could simply exist in the space they had helped create. A galaxy trying, however imperfectly, to be better than it had been. Chen's communicator chirped. A message from Earth. The Prime Minister wants to know if you're planning to come home anytime soon. There's talk of making you humanity's first ambassador at large to the Assembly. She smiled and typed a quick reply. Tell them I'll think about it. I have work to do here first. There would be time for Earth later. Right now, humanity was no longer just one species among thousands, trying desperately to carve out a space for itself in a hostile galaxy. They were builders, along with hundreds of other civilizations, of something unprecedented. A truly galactic civilization based not on domination but on cooperation. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be setbacks, failures, moments when the old certainty seemed preferable to the messy chaos of freedom. But it would be theirs, built by choice rather than coercion, maintained by consent rather than force. As Chen walked out of the assembly hall and into the warm evening air of Meridian Prime, she looked up at the stars and thought about all the civilizations out there, watching and wondering if this grand experiment would succeed or fail. We'll find out together, she whispered to the galaxy. All of us as equals. That's all anyone can ask for. Above her, the stars burned with the light of a billion possibilities, and for the first time in 15,000 years, the galaxy's future was truly undecided. That, Chen reflected, was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen.